Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the Ministry of External Affairs. Now, Parliamentary Committee on External Affairs has said that the Ministry of External Affairs should strengthen manpower in its embassies abroad and set up missions in all UN member states in line with India's expanding global stakes and profound changes in the foreign policy domain. In its report tabled in Parliament this week, the committee has also recommended an allocation of at least 1% of the overall annual budget of the government to the ministry in view of its challenging mandate to make India an influential nation in the world. Now, the committee has urged the MEA to work out a roadmap for enhancing its capacities and capabilities, whether it is in the form of structural changes or a complete revamp of its organizational structure. Today, we're going to discuss and analyze this report, the report of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs. What does it say? What does it actually mean? And how will it be implemented from various stakeholders? And joining us for more on this is a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with former Ambassador Virendra Gupta is with us. He's served with the Ministry of External Affairs for a quite long time. He would be able to give us insights into what actually is the report is saying and what actually we're talking about. We also have with us Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Editor of Hindustan Times. He's joining us. And also Mr. Prakash Javdekar, Member of Parliament and Member of the Standing Committee on External Affairs, will also be joining us in a short while. I'll begin with you, Ambassador Gupta. Let's first start by understanding, the domain expertise and, so to understand the role of the Ministry of External Affairs when we are looking at it from Indian perspective.
Well, the External Affairs Ministry is responsible for conducting India's foreign policy, projecting diplomacy, and I think we were always short-staffed. When I was there, Indian Foreign Service was very small, but the anomaly has been exacerbated with the passage of time. Firstly, I find it odd that our percentage in the budget has been declining. In 15-16 financial year, the allocation to External Affairs Ministry was almost about 0.8%, and it has always remained between 0.6 and 0.7%. But surprisingly, lately it has come down to about 0.4. Now, if you looked at it in conjunction with the challenges, and there is a general demand and expectation that India should play a more appropriate role, keeping in tune with its growing profile in international relations.
Okay.
Now, at the end of it, you do need money, to back your activities. Now, broadly, the External Affairs Ministry allocation goes into establishment, goes into foreign aid. We provide a lot of assistance to neighboring countries, Africa, other developing countries, and cultural diplomacy. Now, I think by all measures, the allocation is very, very inappropriate. And it is not the first time that the Parliament and parliamentary committees have been talking about it. I recall at the time when I was heading the ICCR in 2009, we had a long meeting with the Parliamentary Committee, which was headed by Sushma Swaraj ji. And the committee was unanimous that the budget allocated to ICCR, which was about 200 crores at that time, it should be taken to 2.5 times. But that is easier said than done, because you can't even get 5 people added to your strength without very cumbersome finance ministry approval.
Okay.
So I think all of that will need to be addressed, and I'm happy that Parliamentary Committee has raised this extremely important issue.
Okay, perhaps the Standing Committee on External Affairs is referring to all those aspects there. Let's listen in from Mr. Prakash Javdekar, who is joining us right now. He's a member of that committee as well. Mr. Javdekar, if you could, summarize for us the committee's findings. What is it that the actually committee is recommending to the government when we're talking about, changes which have to be brought in Ministry of External Affairs, both in terms of finances and personnel as well?
Both these aspects are very important, and we have said, but let us also understand that countries will remain the same. Number of countries. So number of embassies also practically remain the same. We have increased in last 5 years many embassies in Africa and other countries, Latin American countries. So one ambassador which is looking after 5 is now looking after 2. So this we have already done. More importantly, after all, GDP also has increased double, more than double in last 7, 8, 9 years. So that is also very important. That the financial allocation percentage wise don't see, it is in the actual figures. That is very important. But one thing is sure, that we have said we require entirely a new role, because Modi ji has started some very new initiatives. Ambassadors meet every year, 3 days, which used to be just formality earlier, or small debate or small discussions and lectures. But now it has become a theme-based event. And we now expect that it should not be, embassies are not only diplomatic missions. Embassies are the trade vehicles. Embassies are the goodwill vehicles. Embassies have to perform so many roles, in right from students' education to employed people and getting new people, new partnership, increasing the tourism. Everything now is in the purview of, and if they decide,
Okay.
they have the credibility and they can do it with the diaspora and many other people and even the natives. So this is now the new role which we envisage.
Okay.
And I had gone in the UN very many times, because of I was in charge of Environment Ministry. But I'm very sure that China, in every delegation, used to be at least threefold than us. Their permanent staff in all UN organs is nearly 5 times of us. So we have recommended that our staff in UN organizations also should increase, because narrative and proposals are fixed there only. And therefore, we must have a contribution in narratives, as well as we must have a place in diplomatic efforts. We need to do network the countries.
Okay.
So all this is a collated efforts, and that is why we have demanded or recommended that government should increase not only physical expenditure, but also the role change and the basic attitude of having more people in all these international efforts, because this diplomacy matters to a great extent.
Okay, okay. Pramit, I'd like to bring you in here, since you also kept a close watch on India's External Affairs Ministry and its efforts as well. Now they're becoming multifold, as Mr. Javdekar was pointing out, not just diplomatic aspect, but also various other related issues which have to be dealt with at various missions, at our mission in United Nations as well, and the overall picture. How would you analyze, this committee's report and the present scenario where we stand, and the kind of, demand which is there on the Ministry of External Affairs? And how do we, bring a sort of gel all these together?
So yes, I think the previous speakers have correctly pointed out the demands on Indian diplomacy have expanded dramatically. We have opened about somewhere in the lines of at least almost close to 20 new missions over the past several years. We've just opened one, for example, last year, I think in Paraguay for the first time. We had situations in the past few years, not just during the COVID pandemic, but even now, for example, when the global hunt for critical minerals, rare earths is on. We are going around and asking countries, can you help us on, let's say, lithium or rare earths, and then finding that we don't even have an embassy in that country, or asking them to help us in the UN on a specific issue. And then the country says, well, we don't mind doing that, but it would be very nice if you had an ambassador at some point in our country. Now, I would say we've covered most of the world. I believe there are 122 missions in the world. India has 110 consulates and 8 other representations. But another element is that we are also becoming much more active in international organizations. We are joining a whole host or becoming more active in a lot of not just UN organizations, but a whole set of global organizations handling everything from technology to supply chains and so on, many of which require some degree of diplomatic representation. And the second element is that as diplomacy itself is changing, we, for example, if you look at something like the Quad, the Quad is about geopolitics of technology. It's a technology coalition. But we need to have officials and representatives who are trained and to be able to negotiate sensibly in these issues. They have to be up on semiconductor technology. They have to be up on quantum computing. And so on, which means you not only have to induct specialists in these areas, you also have to up-train your own diplomats to be able to negotiate. You can't be in a position where you negotiate without the sort of skill sets that are required.
Okay.
Aid programs, correctly mentioned, in other governments, the foreign ministries and the aid programs are often two separate budgets. In India, they're the same. And when we build connectivity to, let's say, Bangladesh or building ports in Africa or something like that, it's actually coming out of the foreign ministry's budget, not from a separate budget, which is the case in other countries. Aid will become again much more diplomatically important in the coming days. And finally, the diaspora is now something that the Indian Foreign Ministry has to be deeply involved in. The Indian diaspora is increasing rapidly. Over the past 20 years, the diaspora has doubled in size to over 20 million, and will keep rising much more rapidly. And this is going to be another crucial element of our diplomacy, but the sheer numbers involved, again, are rising.
Okay. Those almost all aspects covered there. But Mr. Gupta, in your first response, you spoke about the finances part, but the other part, which Pramit was referring to, and which Mr. Javdekar, when he was talking about the role of the External Affairs Ministry or its employees per se, who are either appointed as ambassadors or part of the missions abroad as well. When we're talking about the manpower, when we're talking about the personnel, the committee report says that the Ministry of External Affairs should work on enhancing its capacities and capabilities, restructure itself in terms of manpower. Reskilling is also required. How do we go about that, and where do we stand?
Well, as both the speakers have said, our role has expanded in a multifaceted manner. We have to connect with the diaspora. We have begun, in fact, in the last 10-15 years, started to pay greater attention to our trade promotion. So, and consular services, tourism promotion, whatever way you look at it, it has become far more interactive with people. It is no longer that ivory tower where the diplomat's job was only to write reports. That has actually receded to the background. There are far more important things. And for that, you need both people resources, human resources, more people. In fact, in most places that I have served, I found that our embassies were the shortest staffed. When we had about 3 or 4 officers apart from the ambassador, every other major embassy had 3 or 4 times the number of people. In fact, Mr. Javdekar did mention about multilateral missions where the Chinese diplomats outnumber us by 3 or 4 times. And this is mentioned about China. I must point out that whereas we spend about 18,000 crores per year on the foreign ministry budget. Now, committee has recommended it should be taken to double of that size. Fair enough. But if you compare it with China, and we seek to compare ourselves with China in terms of projection, in terms of our rising status. Now, you'd be surprised to hear that China has spent close to 1 lakh crores, about 5-6 times what is India is spending. So I think even if we don't wish to, we can't afford that kind of money, but at least we need to spend far more. In multilateral work, we need greater representation. Because unless you have representation, unless you have people, you can't get a grip.
But it's Ambassador Gupta, it's just not about having more people. As Pramit and Mr. Javdekar both were pointing out, it's also about having the right skill set. People with right skill set, they are people trained to do that particular aspect because things are changing. Global
Absolutely.
scenario is changing.
That is an ongoing thing. That is work in progress. In fact, this other major point about restructuring of the Ministry of External Affairs, periodically some exercises have been undertaken. But I think I do agree with the committee's view that in view of the challenges and the thrust that the government itself, in fact, Prime Minister Modi is making increasing demand from the Foreign Ministry, I think the time has come that we need to look at in a very systematic manner how to restructure. And Jaishankar is there. He's from the Foreign Ministry, so he knows the ministry in and out, and he can undertake. But I guess, I don't know what kind of time will he have to devote to that exercise. So it seems to me that the ministry in the first place should work on it in an earnest manner, maybe appoint a committee and look at what kind of restructuring can be done. That will streamline the work, that will make it more effective, that will bring in the right kind of skill sets. I'm not even close to the idea as some foreign service officers are. In fact, in 2007 or so, if I remember, that was the last time a major cadre review exercise was undertaken. And since foreign service officers could not be increased overnight, I think that review very rightly brought in about 300, 400 people from outside on a lateral entry. And I think that should also be considered because there are a lot of people who can... I was working for IDSA for 2 years and I found some remarkably well-informed and qualified people. And I made a suggestion at that time to the ministry that we should get those IDSA people into the ministry. So it will beef up our strength. They will get valuable experience. So it was a win-win situation. But Foreign Secretary was agreeable, but the down-the-line establishment rejected that idea. So I think we need to look at some of these out-of-box ideas.
Out-of-box ideas
yes,
to resolve the issues there. Mr. Javdekar, would you say that the committee is also saying the same thing when it is talking about the cadre review, when it's talking about the enhancement of capacities and capabilities, that let's bring in those people who have the required skill set, perhaps a lateral entry mechanism as well, which has been done in various other ministries at various other levels also by this government. And also, the second question, the point which Pramit raised, in terms of having a different budget for the aid program rather than, pulling it out from the budget of the Ministry of External Affairs, or rather expand the Ministry of External Affairs budget to that extent.
Yeah, I essentially agree because making budget more for the ministry or making a separate budget for aid, ultimately it will be administered by Ministry of Foreign Affairs only. So, but that is a need of our. More importantly, we need to focus on three things. In international multilateral discourse, lobbying plays very important part. And this lobbying is done with continuous networking with countries, with their diplomats, with their representatives in various bodies, and at the same time, putting up our argument. When I became, we were approaching for COP25, or earlier Paris COP, or even earlier, my officers gave me that this is the position. I said, what is the position? On every proposal of UN, we were saying we don't agree, we don't agree. I said, we will not say this. We will say that we propose. We don't oppose, we propose. So we will propose the alternative. And then you will have to play. So this all requires various states, secretariat people. Even in ministry, we got many lateral people to do that kind of research. So this lateral entry is also very important. There is more need of international cooperation for cyber crimes, other crimes, terror, drugs, funding for nefarious activities. So all this also requires more people in the foreign affairs with specialized knowledge and engagement with all kinds of... now even the visa work has increased because people are visiting more to India.
Okay.
And in next 2-3 years, I see so that routine job will also require very many people now. So this uh, ministry needs more budget and more restructuring. Even cadre review is a technical matter which I will not speak about, but I can say that lateral entry is also important and particularly for specific purposes.
Okay, okay. Pramit, your views there on this aspect, because the thrust of the committee's report is two pronged. One is increase the finances. Two is increase the capacity and capabilities of the ministry itself, and that would involve review of the manpower, the cadre review, bringing in more resourceful or skill sets, required skill sets as per the requirements. How do you think this can be achieved?
Good question, because lateral entry has been something that many have argued for, and we're starting to see some, the Modi government has repeatedly pushed for the idea of lateral entry. This doesn't mesh very well with our present British-style permanent bureaucratic structure.
Correct.
It fits very well with the American one, where bureaucrats move in and out of the private sector all the time. But it is a problem with the Indian system, and we'll have to work out some degree of flexibility on that point. And how that does, and I think we may have to go back to see how the British and some of the other European bureaucratic systems have been working on that. But that's absolutely essential, because, as I mentioned, we're starting to see highly specialized requirements in diplomacy these days, which are almost impossible to expect a cadre to handle over time. The Quad, for example, I'd mentioned 26 working groups, 23 of them are on high and critical technologies, which are extraordinarily specialized. Synthetic biology, DNA weaponization. These are subjects that you can't expect a normal civil servant to be able to master. These are things that the scientist for 40, 50 years will master. But these are now part of the negotiating structure of international diplomacy. The other thing is long-term strategic thinking. A lot of governments have, the Americans and the other countries now they have Office of Net Assessment. We just had one policy planning department in the Indian Foreign Ministry, which was for a long time just really seen as a marginal organization. It's now being expanded and revived, and interestingly enough, brings in a lot of outside experts now. But again, long-term strategic thinking is something that now the Indian Foreign Ministry, in fact, most of our ministries, defense and so on, now have to be thinking a lot more seriously.
Okay. So there it is, various aspects. Thank you so much, Pramit, there for sharing your views, Mr. Javdekar and Mr. Gupta as well for sharing your views and insight, as our experts were pointing out, and making sense of the report of the Standing Committee on External Affairs in terms of more money required for the Ministry of External Affairs, how to bring in those structural changes or revamp of its organizational structure, bringing in more manpower to enhance the capacity and capabilities as well. We'll keep a close watch on this and various other developments and come back to you with a different topic as well. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.